My dad disowned me for marrying her. 10 years later, he begged to meet my kids. I chose love over family approval and paid the price with years of silence. When illness softened my father's pride, reconciliation tested old wounds and forgiveness. The first time I heard my father's voice in 10 years, it came through a stranger's phone, thin and trembling, asking if I was still alive. I stood in my kitchen with one hand wrapped around a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, the other holding my phone like it might burn me. Outside, the morning traffic whispered past our apartment windows, tires hissing over damp pavement. My daughter was humming softly at the table, coloring a crooked sun in yellow crayon. My son was building a tower out of cereal boxes on the floor, narrating his own little victory in a whisper. Life was ordinary and warm and safe, and suddenly it wasn't. Is this Daniel?" the voice asked again, breath catching on the consonants. For a second, I couldn't answer. My throat tightened the way it does when you're trying not to cry in front of someone who doesn't deserve your tears anymore. I recognized that voice in my bones, the gravelly edge from decades of shouting over factory noise, the stubborn pride wrapped in every syllable. It was my father. "Yes," I finally said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "It's me." There was a pause, filled with faint hospital sounds, a rolling cart, a distant cough, the steady beep of something keeping time. Then he exhaled slowly, like he had been holding his breath for a decade. I don't have much time. I want to meet your kids." The words landed heavier than any insult he had ever thrown at me. Before that call, my life had been simple, in the quietest, most meaningful way. Not easy, never easy, but honest. I worked mornings at a small architectural firm downtown, the kind of place where the coffee always tasted slightly burnt and the printer jammed at the worst moments. Evenings were for spaghetti dinners, mismatched socks, bedtime stories that never ended when they were supposed to. My wife Maya moved through our home with a soft steadiness that made everything feel anchored. She hummed when she folded laundry. She touched my shoulder when she passed behind me in the kitchen, just enough to say, "I'm here." The kids adored her. So did I, in the quiet ways that build over years rather than explode in grand gestures. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment above a bakery that smelled like sugar and yeast every morning. Some days, when the wind carried the scent just right, it felt like waking up inside a warm loaf of bread. It wasn't much, but it was ours. My father was the one missing piece, or maybe the piece I'd learned to live without. 10 years ago, when I told him I was going to marry Maya, he didn't yell. That would have been easier. He didn't throw anything or storm out. He simply looked at me like I had become someone unrecognizable. "She's not one of us," he said flatly, sitting at the kitchen table where my mother used to place his dinner every night before she passed. His hands were folded, like he was already at a funeral. "You're throwing away your future. She's the woman I love," I replied. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. I remember being surprised about that. He stood up slowly, chair legs scraping against tile. "If you marry her," he said, eyes cold and unblinking, "don't call me your father anymore." And just like that, I lost him. No wedding congratulations, no birthday calls, no accidental messages sent to the wrong number. Silence, thick and permanent, like a wall built brick by brick from pride and stubbornness. I grieved him the way people grieve the living, awkwardly, quietly, in moments that sneak up on you when you're not prepared. When my son was born, I held that tiny wrinkled hand and felt a hollow space inside my chest where a grandfather should have been. When my daughter learned to ride her bike, I wished, just for a second, that someone older and stern might be watching from the sidewalk, pretending not to be impressed. But I learned to let that ache sit where it was. Life kept moving, until the phone rang. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. I usually do. Something in me hesitated, a small, inexplicable tug. That tug turned into my father's voice, asking if I was still alive. He didn't apologize, not yet. He didn't explain why he was calling after all these years. He only said he was sick, very sick, and that he wanted to meet the children he had pretended didn't exist. After I hung up, the kitchen felt strangely quiet. The hum of the refrigerator sounded louder. My coffee tasted bitter. Maya watched me carefully from across the room, reading my face the way she always could. "Who was that?" she asked gently. I opened my mouth and realized I didn't know how to answer without reopening a wound I'd spent 10 years learning to live with. "Someone from my past," I said, finally. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew the past was already walking back towards us.
That night, after the kids were asleep and the apartment had settled into its familiar quiet, the distant clink of dishes from the bakery downstairs, the low hum of traffic drifting through the cracked bedroom window, I finally told Maya the truth. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, our knees touching without thinking about it. She held a mug of chamomile tea in both hands, breathing in the steam like a ritual. I traced the worn seam of a throw pillow with my thumb, stalling. "It was my dad," I said. She didn't react right away. Maya rarely did. She had a way of absorbing words slowly, letting them land properly before responding. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady and open. "Your dad," she repeated softly. "He's in the hospital. He says he's sick. He wants to meet the kids." The silence stretched. Somewhere in the building, someone laughed, a muffled, careless sound that felt strangely out of place. Maya took a small sip of tea. "How do you feel about that?" I wanted to say I didn't care. I wanted to say I'd moved on. But the truth was messier, tangled with old hurt and old longing. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me feels like a door I sealed shut just burst open without asking permission." She nodded slowly. "And the other part?" "The other part still remembers standing in his kitchen while he told me I wasn't his son anymore." Maya's fingers tightened slightly around her mug. Not in anger, in memory. She had lived the consequences of that moment too. The whispers at extended family gatherings, the cousins who suddenly stopped inviting us to holidays, the quiet judgment that followed us like a shadow for years. "Do you think he's calling because he's scared?" she asked. "Maybe, or maybe he just doesn't want to die with unfinished business." Maya set the mug down carefully on the coaster, aligning it just right like she always did when she was thinking hard. "Those aren't the same thing," she said gently. I knew she was right. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake listening to the rhythm of my children's breathing through the thin walls, the soft creak of the building settling. My mind kept drifting backward, to memories I hadn't visited in years. My father had been a rigid man, molded by long shifts and short tempers. He believed in rules that didn't bend. Families stuck together, he said, as long as everyone followed the same blueprint. He had wanted me to marry someone from our community, someone who fit neatly into the life he understood. Maya didn't fit that mold. She was warm, where he was hard, curious, where he was cautious. She laughed easily, spoke her mind, questioned traditions that felt arbitrary to her. To him, that made her dangerous. The first clue that something was shifting came 2 days later. I received another call, this time from a nurse. "Mr. Carter," she asked politely, "your dad listed you as your emergency contact. He's been asking about you non-stop today." Emergency contact. The phrase felt absurd after a decade of silence. "He told me you might be hesitant," she continued, lowering her voice slightly, "but he's not doing very well. The doctors think it would mean a lot to him." After I hung up, I sat at my desk at work staring at the blueprint in front of me without seeing it. Lines blurred together, measurements lost meaning. My coworker tapped my shoulder twice before I realized he was speaking to me. "You okay, man?" he asked. "Yeah," I lied automatically. "Just tired." But something inside me had begun to shift, not toward forgiveness, not yet, but toward curiosity, toward the unsettling realization that the man who once felt immovable might actually be fragile now. That evening, I found an old box in the back of our closet while searching for winter scarves. Inside were forgotten pieces of my past, a faded baseball glove, a cracked photo frame, a folded birthday card my father had given me when I was 17. The handwriting was unmistakable, blocky, heavy pressure, no wasted flourishes. "Proud of you, son." I sat on the bedroom floor longer than I meant to, tracing the ink with my finger like it might disappear if I didn't anchor it there. The next strange moment came the following weekend. We were at the park with the kids, leaves crunched under our shoes. The air smelled like damp earth and distant fireplaces. My daughter was attempting to teach her stuffed rabbit how to go down the slide properly. A man about my father's age sat alone on a nearby bench, watching children play with a hollow, yearning expression. He adjusted his cap nervously every few seconds, hands fidgeting with nothing. For reasons I couldn't explain, my chest tightened. I imagined my father sitting alone somewhere, picturing a family he'd never met, imagining faces he didn't deserve to know. The thought unsettled me more than I expected. That evening, I caught myself looking at old photos on my phone, images from years before the fracture. My father holding a fishing pole beside me at a muddy riverbank, his hand on my shoulder at my college graduation, pride flickering briefly through his usual sternness. I didn't tell Maya about the photos. I didn't tell Maya about the man on the bench. I didn't want to admit that the wall I'd built was beginning to crack. But cracks have a way of letting things in, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet question had begun forming. Not whether my father deserved forgiveness, but whether I could live with myself if I never gave it the chance.
The day I finally decided to see him, I felt like I was stepping onto a bridge suspended over a chasm I had spent 10 years building. Maya drove the kids to her mother's house for the afternoon. I told her I needed space to think, though I wasn't entirely sure what I would do when I arrived. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that the knuckles turned white. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee, a scent I had associated with anxiety and waiting rooms for as long as I could remember. I walked past a line of wheelchairs and buzzing monitors, feeling every eye on me, though no one really saw me. The nurse had warned me, he's weak and he gets emotional. I wasn't sure if I was prepared for that, or for my own emotions spilling out like a dam finally breaking. When I opened his hospital room door, I froze. He was thinner than I remembered. His skin had that pale, translucent quality that made every vein visible, every line on his face sharper, more pronounced. He looked smaller, somehow diminished by the illness, but his eyes, those stubborn gray eyes, still carried the same intensity that had haunted me for years. He tried to straighten, but the movement made him wince. "Dad!" My voice cracked, betraying more than I intended. He didn't move immediately. He just looked at me, unblinking, like he was measuring whether I was real, whether I had changed, or whether he had imagined all these years of silence. "You came," he said finally, and the words sounded fragile, like they could shatter. "I did. I came because you asked." My hands were in my pockets, gripping tightly at the fabric. I wanted to tell him everything, the anger, the hurt, the years of absence, but the words stuck in my throat. I wanted to see them," he said. "Your kids." I swallowed. There it was, the moment I had imagined in my dreams and nightmares alike. A chance at reconciliation, but also a risk of reopening old wounds. "They're at Maya's mom's house," I said, "but they can come, if you're sure." He nodded, and for the first time in a decade, he looked almost vulnerable, almost human in a way I hadn't seen before. I called Maya, who agreed to bring the children, though I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "Just be careful," she said softly. "Remember, this is him, not the dad you wish he'd been." I watched him in silence as the minutes passed, feeling the room shrink around us. The beeping of the heart monitor, the hum of the overhead lights, the distant murmur of nurses became the soundtrack to an encounter I had imagined countless times, yet never truly prepared for. And then the door opened. My daughter ran in first, her curly hair bouncing, and she froze for a moment when she saw him. I could see the questions forming in her wide eyes. My son followed, dragging his little backpack along the floor, unsure of why he felt both nervous and excited. "Papa?" my daughter whispered. He blinked. The words seemed to catch him off guard. His voice, when it came, was low and tremulous. "Hello, little ones." There was a pause.
awkward, almost fragile, like the room was holding its breath. Then slowly, he reached out a hand toward my daughter. She hesitated, but curiosity overcame caution, and she let him take her small hand in his. The touch was tentative, unsure, a handshake between two strangers pretending to know each other. My son climbed onto the edge of the bed, looking at him cautiously. "I'm your grandson," he said proudly, as if that fact alone could bridge a decade of absence. He laughed quietly, a sound I barely recognized. I suppose you are." His voice cracked, and he cleared his throat, looking away for a moment. I watched them. My father, so rigid, so prideful, so unyielding, was now reduced to a man trying to connect with children who barely knew him. And something inside me loosened. Not forgiveness yet, not entirely, but understanding, maybe even compassion. He asked questions haltingly. "Do you like school? What's your favorite food? Who's your teacher?" Each word was careful, deliberate, as if he were afraid of breaking something sacred. My kids answered politely, cautiously testing the waters. At one point, my daughter asked, "Do you like rabbits, Papa?" She held up her stuffed animal, and he looked at it, genuinely puzzled for a moment. Then he smiled, small and crooked. "I think I can like rabbits." It was such a simple human moment that it almost broke me. The walls between us, resentment, anger, years of absence, didn't disappear, but they became permeable, like ice starting to thaw in the first hint of spring sunlight. After an hour, they had to leave. My father sat back in the hospital bed, exhausted, his hand still hovering near where my daughter's had been. I didn't speak first, unsure what to say that would undo the fragile thread we had just begun to weave. I wanted to say," he began slowly, "I'm sorry for everything." I nodded, the lump in my throat making it impossible to speak. 10 years of silence, pride, and stubbornness had led us here, to this room, to this moment, fragile, trembling, and tentative. "Maybe we can try again," he whispered. I exhaled, long and steady, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease just slightly. "Maybe," I said. "We can try." And for the first time in a decade, I believed it might be possible.
The next few weeks were strange, awkward, hopeful, and terrifying all at once. My father wasn't suddenly the man I had wished he'd been. He still had his stubborn streak, his sharp tongue, the way he could make silence feel like a punishment. But he was making an effort, and that counted. We arranged for him to come to our apartment one Saturday afternoon. Maya was nervous. "Remember," she said quietly as I opened the door for him, "he's still your dad, not theirs. Let them set the pace." I nodded, though my stomach churned. My kids had never met him in any meaningful way. There was no grandfatherly bond to fall back on. They only had me as the map for navigating this strange terrain. My father stepped inside, cane in hand, and looked around like a traveler entering an unfamiliar land. The apartment smelled like toasted bread, breakfast we had made earlier, and faint vanilla from my daughter's candle. I think he noticed the smells first, the ordinary intimacy of our life, before seeing the faces that belonged to it. "Wow," he said quietly, almost to himself. "You've done well here." I blinked. Praise from him was rare, so hearing it now felt almost like sunlight through fog. The kids approached cautiously. My daughter clutched her stuffed rabbit, the one he had liked at the hospital. My son kept a safe distance at first, but curiosity outweighed caution. "You brought rabbits again?" my father asked, managing a small smile. "Yes," she said, smiling. "Do you like them now?" He chuckled, a deeper, more confident sound than before. I think I do." I watched this small connection unfold, tentative, fumbling, yet profoundly human. It was nothing heroic, no sweeping declaration of forgiveness or redemption, just tiny, careful steps toward each other. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt like maybe there was a bridge after all. Over lunch, the conversation was awkward at first. My father asked questions about school, about the kids' hobbies, about Maya's work, but there was a subtle change in his tone. He wasn't interrogating anymore. He was genuinely curious. At one point, My son proudly showed him a drawing of a spaceship. My father examined it carefully. I used to love building models, he admitted. I never taught you, did I? No, I said softly. You didn't, but we can learn together now, if you want. He hesitated, then nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. It was a start. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation shifted toward the past, not in blame, not in recrimination, but in cautious acknowledgement. I was wrong, he said quietly, about Maya, about everything. I let my pride get in the way. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was push you away. I swallowed hard. 10 years of silence, of resentment, of imagining conversations I'd never have, all condensed into this fragile confession. I don't know if I can forgive everything, I said honestly, but I can start, and I want the kids to know you. That matters more than my pride now. He nodded, looking at the children playing with building blocks on the floor. I just want a chance to know them, to make up for what I lost. The simplicity of his words hit me harder than any argument we ever had. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the father I had wished for, but it was human, and it was enough to begin again. Later, when he left, my kids waved shyly from the doorway. My daughter clutched her rabbit tightly, and my son lingered just a second longer, glancing back at the man who had been absent for most of their lives. As I closed the door, I realized something important. Reconciliation didn't erase the past. It didn't fix everything, but it gave us a chance to live with it differently, to build something new from the fragments of what had been broken. Maya wrapped an arm around me. You okay? She asked. I nodded, leaning into her warmth. Better than I expected, I admitted. It's not perfect, but it's real. That evening, I reflected on everything, the years of silence, the bitterness I had carried, the fear that had kept me from reaching out sooner, and I realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about making a conscious choice to let someone back into your life, cautiously, slowly, with your eyes wide open. I looked at the kids asleep in their beds later, listening to the soft rhythm of their breathing, and wondered how many moments we waste letting pride dictate our lives, how many opportunities to love, to heal, to connect, are lost because we wait too long to forgive. I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I wanted my kids to see that healing was possible, even if it was messy, even if it hurt, even if it took 10 years. Would you have waited? Would you have opened the door after all that silence, after all that pain? Life is fragile, fleeting. We cling to anger because it's safe. But love, even cautious, slow love, is worth taking the risk.
The weeks that followed were uneven. There were moments of laughter, like when my father attempted to cook spaghetti and ended up with more sauce on himself than on the plate. There were awkward silences too, those pauses where old wounds hovered between us, reminding me that forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. But little by little, he began showing up in ways that mattered. He attended my son's school play, applauding louder than anyone else in the audience, a proud smile breaking across his face as if he had just discovered a part of himself he had lost. He helped my daughter with her homework, patient and deliberate, guiding her hand when she struggled with multiplication tables. And slowly, the children responded. They began seeking him out, asking questions, telling stories, and laughing at his dry humor. Maya watched quietly from the sidelines one evening, her hand resting on my shoulder. You know, she said softly, I didn't think he could ever change, but he's trying, and that's all any of us can ask for. I nodded, feeling the weight of the past lift slightly. Trying. It was all that mattered. The breakthrough came one evening after dinner. My father and I were sitting at the kitchen table, the children in bed, the apartment quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. He looked across at me, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and I noticed something different, a vulnerability in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Daniel, he began, voice low, careful. I want to thank you for letting me back in. I know I don't deserve it, and I know I caused you pain, but thank you for letting me see them, for letting me try. I felt my throat tighten. 10 years of anger, 10 years of imagined conversations, 10 years of grief and pride. It all condensed into this quiet, unassuming expression of humility. You're welcome, I said softly. "I'm glad you're trying. That's what matters." He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It isn't about forgetting or pretending that the hurt never happened. It's about choosing to let someone in anyway, to let the possibility of connection outweigh the certainty of pain. Over the next months, we settled into a new rhythm. My father became a part of our lives in a way that was cautious but genuine. He attended birthdays, school events, and family dinners. Sometimes old habits resurfaced, stubbornness, short words, the way he could get lost in his own opinions. But those moments became opportunities for growth, not walls that pushed us apart. One afternoon, as the kids were playing in the living room and Maya prepared lunch, my father and I stood in the kitchen quietly, listening to the sounds of life, the laughter of children, the rustle of paper as my son flipped through a comic book, the soft hum of the city outside our window. I never thought I'd get this chance to see them grow up, to be part of their lives. Neither did I admitted. But here we are. There was a long silence. Comfortable this time, the kind that comes from knowing that life is fragile, but love, patient, deliberate love, has a way of finding a path through the hardest terrain. That night, after the kids were asleep and Maya and I were cleaning up, I reflected on everything: the anger, the resentment, the years of silence, and the cautious bridge we had begun to rebuild. I thought about how life often gives us second chances in the most unexpected ways. I thought about pride, stubbornness, and the courage it takes to let someone back in. And I realized something that felt like a lesson worth remembering. Holding on to anger only prolongs suffering. Letting someone back in doesn't erase the past, but it allows the present to be full, alive, and meaningful. It allows love to grow again, even in places we once thought were barren. Sometimes I still catch myself staring at the kids, imagining all the years my father missed, all the milestones he won't fully remember. But then I see him laughing with them, teaching them, learning from them, and I know that even a fractured relationship can find its way back to warmth. Would you have let him back in? Could you have forgiven after all that silence? Life doesn't wait for perfect people or perfect circumstances. It waits for courage, the courage to open a door, to take a risk, and to love, even when it's messy. And as I watched my father helping my daughter tie her shoelaces that evening, a small smile on his face, I realized that sometimes the people we think are gone forever are only waiting to come home. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments. And if you've experienced a family rift, maybe it's time to take that small, brave step towards connection. Sometimes it's worth everything.